So I'm recording just so everybody knows. Yeah, good afternoon. Hi again. Those of you that attended the first session, very good. Hopefully, if you didn't attend the first session, you listened back on the other one, on the second one. So this is our second look into operational realignment after lockdown. I'm joined again by Harriet, which is good. So for those that don't know me, I'm Bryan. I head up for Searchlight Consulting. I head up our strategy, architecture, and just general consulting activities. And I think, given the background that I've got in business change, technology-enabled change, and particularly in around manufacturing supply chain organisations and other organisations, I think this situation we find ourselves in is quite an interesting one. And I think the first session talked about a number of different things. So anybody that knows me will know that I've got 3 or 4 different passions in things, one of which is the natural world. Next one is cooking and photography as well. And the other one is about live music. And within this session, I think last time we did pandemic cliche bingo. In this session, what I've done is incorporated some musical themes in that. So as we go through this, just see if you can spot the song titles, name the artists. There's 13 in total. We can have a look at it at the end. And I even created a Spotify playlist if you're interested in it afterwards. So anyway, Harriet. So Harriet's joining me again for a second time. So welcome, Harriet.
So hi, so what I'm bringing to the party is the kind of personal lens. So I have been a coach for 20 years. I help people going, as through transitions. So whether that's a massive step up at work in terms of role, or a massive change that they're going through at work, career-wise, role-wise. So I'm the yin to Bryan's yang, as it were, in terms of I'll be looking at the personal journey. And in terms of my hobbies, my big thing is I'm a stand-up comic, which is what my TED talk was about, the transformative power of humour. So I need to do another webinar with jokes based. I do weekly emails with jokes, and I think this week's was a little close to the knuckles, so I'm looking forward to loads of unsubscribes as we come off this. We'll see.
All right. So so we introduced this picture last time, and just to try and position where people are, and as governments are easing that lockdown activities, easing down the lockdown rules, and trying to get both the economy back and people back to work and the economy back up and running again, then we're sort of focusing in this one more on less on the physical logistics and physical safety type things that a lot of organisations are going through at the moment, the logistical challenges of that, but focusing more on some of the journeys that are going to take place as people look at their moving towards whatever their new desired future state might be. And we recognise that this journey is for employees, it's workforce, it's businesses, it's customers, it's suppliers, it's supply chains. Products and services will also go through a sort of a re-evaluation and a refocusing. And the principle being that there's going to be a number of different interim states before people get to not a final destination, but their future operating models. And overlapping on that is this personal leadership journey that Harriet's focusing on. So last time we introduced this framework, and really what this isn't rocket science, but it's all about trying to get clarity and focus, trying to help people to frame where they are at the moment and create a vision or create a view of where they would like to be or where they need to be in the next, and it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 9 months, it could be a bit longer, but it's certainly at this point in time, it's probably not going to be your typical thing of trying to paint a vision of where you're going to be in 3 to 5 years time. It's going to be in a shorter time horizon of that, and it's also an opportunity to look at the portfolio of projects that people are were undertaking, and looking at how they need to be either refocused, restarted, or even initiate new business and technology projects, but looking at how we do that in a safe and controlled and effective manner. So last time we looked at the beginning and the end of the journey, or the beginning and the ends of the journey, the destinations that we're trying to get to. And we talked about, understanding where you need to get to, but also where you are today. In this section, we're going to be looking at three priorities. We're going to be with three things. We're going to be looking at priorities, going to looking at the options and solutions and sort of the parameters by which to look at those and evaluate options and solutions. And then we're going to look at the sequencing and taking action. And again, we're looking at this from an organisational perspective and a personal and leadership perspective. So, Harriet.
So I'm muting myself. So from a personal perspective, I mean, Brian's going to talk about the kind of business change and business priorities. From a personal perspective, I'm a simple soul, and for me, buckets are important when we're talking about this stage of the kind of change journey. And it reminds me of, when you're on a beach and you see all the pebbles, and it can feel utterly overwhelming, and the amount of choice that we've got right now, and the decisions as we're easing out of lockdown, there are a gazillion different decisions on a personal and professional level about where should I be focusing, what are the risks, where should I put in my time and my energy. So as I say, I love simplicity, that thinking about it in terms of buckets, what's really important to me. And on the last webinar, we talked about perhaps there is a destination. Sometimes it can be useful as an individual to focus on, where do I want to be in a year's time? Right now, I'm finding for a lot of my coaches, that's just too kind of overwhelming. And it's more around a kind of, a compass bearing of where we're heading. So this idea of buckets, what are the things that are really important to you right now, and you need to focus your attention across those buckets. Too many buckets and it becomes overwhelming, too few buckets and we become kind of out of balance. So on the next slide, there are 4 key kind of fundamental buckets that I think are useful to focus on. Now, you can call them different things. You don't have to have 4 buckets, you can have 8 or 6 or whatever you like, but these 4 buckets for me, I find a real useful shortcut. There's something about security, as in, have I got the income, have I got the house, the shelter, have I got the sort of financial security and the physical security to feel okay. There's that basic sort of security bit, and so there's some of our bandwidth, some of our energy is around personal cash flow, personal income, making sure that we've got that kind of security, that safety. The second bucket is around what I call self-care. Now, this is one that I'm noticing, especially leaders that I'm coaching, is going slightly out of the window. That they're kind of, the adrenaline's almost worn off of that first crisis charge that we had over the last few months. And a lot of things, we know this stuff around what is it that keeps your energy up? What is it that means you can maintain the momentum through all the stuff that's going to go on ahead? So whether that's sleep, whether that's exercise, whether that's nutrition, there's the kind of self-care piece that which we ignore at our peril. The next bucket is significant others. Again, I'm finding that a lot of people have focused so much on keeping relatives or employees or customers or stakeholders safe that they've almost really focused on this bucket at the expense of other ones. So for sure, there's a piece here around immediate family, about employees, around key stakeholders. I've also seen the opposite, where people have got very defensive, real scarcity mindset, and are kind of ignoring those stakeholders. And then the last bucket is what I'd call success. Now, this is going to be different for each one of us. And what I'm noticing is that what's really thrown things up in the air for people personally right now is often that notion of success for them. They're finding it hard. So it might be that actually, on reflection, got enough cash to keep the business going or to sort the family out for the next wee while, but people aren't feeling successful. They're not feeling in the same way that they normally would be around, I run this business, or I manage this team, or I deliver this program. It's not quite as tangible as it normally is. So I think reflecting around all of the priorities and choices and things that we're going to talk about in this webinar, it may well be that there's a macro piece around, are you focusing across all 4 of those buckets, or is one getting undue attention? And for sure, for week to week or day to day, we're going to be kind of out of kilter, but for long term, it's going to be around all of those 4 buckets that are going to make sure that the personal journey that we have through change is sustainable. So do put your questions and thoughts and comments and stuff in chat. We'll have a chance at the end of all of this to pick up on specific questions. And there's also, so that's around priorities. The next thing I wanted to talk about before I hand back to Bryan is around choices and around the options that we have. And I wanted to tell you a story. I think a couple of you have heard this story before. It's one of my favourite stories. It's honestly happened. I was, years ago, I was a management consultant for Ernst & Young, and I was up at a project in Glasgow. We were there for about 6 months, putting in a new system. I was doing the kind of people change side of things. And one of my colleagues managed to luck out and get the swanky hotel that we were never normally allowed to get, but our normal hotel was full. And the next morning, we're all quite lonely, sort of Alcatraz on this project, and we're like, oh, what was your room like? What was your room like? And he said it was really disappointing. It was like really kind of brown wood and really small and cruddy, and Anyway, the next day he came back onto the project, and he had the humility and the generosity to share with us the truth, which was that he hadn't realised that the door in the corner that he thought was a wardrobe door was in fact the door that led to the suite. So basically he'd been staying in the kind of kids annex or the maids annex or whatever, and he had this amazing suite that he hadn't even slept in for the first night because he hadn't known it was there. And I love this story because it's such a metaphor for how often do we personally have options that we just close off to ourselves because we haven't opened that metaphorical wardrobe door. And how do you do that? Well, a great way of opening that door is to ask questions. The questions are a bit like, those of you who've got dogs, if you throw a stick, then most dogs cannot help themselves. They kind of bound after it. So questions are like that. They open our wardrobe doors. They lead us off into different directions. And there are a gazillion questions that can help you think about the personal choices that you've got right now. But I'm going to share 2 of my absolute favourites with you that are very good at opening wardrobe doors. So on the next slide, I've got 2 questions. The first one is, what would a wise old friend suggest? And it continues to baffle me as a coach that, if I ask a question like that often the answer will be there. You don't actually have to go and ask the wise old friend. You kind of know it intuitively what they'd suggest. So, for example, I was coaching someone recently who was looking for the next project to work on, who was a consultant and was looking for the next project. And he immediately came back with, well, he told me to get a proper job. And by that, he meant he'd closed himself off to thinking about kind of more traditional jobs, as it were, rather than program jobs. So that was just a wardrobe door that he hadn't thought of opening. Or another coach recently, I was talking about how they, engage their teams. The wise old friend, the question was, well, just be honest with them. And they hadn't realised that they were trying desperately to be this kind of in control. I have all the answers. I know exactly what's going to happen for the next 6 months. And the wise old friend would have gone, well, of course you don't. The other question that I love is, if you were to fly forward and you were to look back with the benefit of hindsight, because it's a classic cognitive bias that we get focused on the now. And the marketeers know this. That's why instant gratification is much more easy to monetize, and we forget about our future selves. So simply asking that question will help you to look back and think, how do I run my personal journey, as it were, over the next few months.
Thanks, Harriet. Thank you. So I think that whole bit about buckets as well and prioritisation. Obviously, most businesses, we're faced with doing this as businesses and organisations as well. But I think it's amazing. I mean, I put up what is a very obvious and very well known, 2x2 of buckets that you can, ways in which you can categorise things. But I think that whilst it's easy and may seem obvious, I never fails to amaze me the number of times we walk into companies and they do 2 things pretty badly, right? they do two things pretty badly. One is they don't frame the problem properly. Yeah, they don't. Everyone's trying to solve a different problem potentially, and then the other one is that they might say that they set priorities, but actually that's just a result of a bun fight between different factions and different personal agendas often, and at the same time, they don't maintain that focus on a few critical things. And at this point in time now, we said this in the first session as well, at this point in time, that focus, that laser precision that says, right now, these are the goals and outcomes that matter most to us. These are the things that we will be focusing on. And so the prioritization isn't necessarily about prioritizing the options, the solutions that you've got. It starts by prioritizing the outcomes that you want to focus on. Yeah, and the way that that I think about the buckets in this particular instance is more about what do we need to do now, what are we going to do next, what are we going to do at some point in the future, and actually what things aren't we going to consider at this point in time, because actually making a decision to not do something is as important as a decision to do something. Yeah, making a decision so that everybody focuses on that small number of things that we need to do now, and I put these things over here and I don't need to worry about them at the moment. And I think that's the point that I think most organizations don't do. They might. We worked with a company, it was CityLink, which was a logistics distribution company. You may recall them, and they were. This is about 6-9 months before they were already struggling at that point in time, and we were invited in by the chairman, who was the interim chief exec there, and he basically said, we're not getting anything delivered when it comes to projects. We're delivering packages and parcels, but we're not getting the improvement projects delivered. And we went in, just did a simple thing, looked at what they were doing, 160 things they were trying to do and achieving none of it. Yeah, and we actually said then, right, you need to focus on one thing. Ultimately, they said they could only they couldn't agree on the one thing. They could agree on 3 things, but then and we shortly moved. We started to disengage and sort of move away from that client. But by the time we left, they got it up to another 15 things. They just couldn't maintain focus, and a few months later, they went bust. Fortunately, we got paid for what we've been doing, but it's really important, I think, that people don't do that and people focus on a few things, not only because the resources, but come back to Harriet's point about overwhelm, individual overwhelm. I think it's important that we get everybody on the same page, everybody focused on the same things. The point about options, so if we've got agreement on what business outcomes we've got, tick, we've got that, we can tick that off, we've got the business outcomes. We're then asking people to come up with options and solutions, yeah, but I think they need to be clear about what are those options and solutions looking to address. Is it a problem that we've got now, or is it a risk or an opportunity that we want to exploit in the months to come? Yeah, is it something which just solves a problem, or is it something that helps us build capability that we might need in the future? I think there's also instances where you're creating options or delivering solutions that provide information that will be of value and insight and enable a business to gain insight into things. And I did debate whether building capability is sort of, lower down the hierarchy than providing information and visibility. But I think that as we move forward in the current circumstances, then having access to information on which to base decisions and information to test whether what we're doing is working or not is going to be a critical thing for the organisations that we work with. The other part of that is recognising whether what you are proposing is it a point in time thing, or is it something that's going to endure, right? So is it something that needs to be absolutely connected to the rest of your business, yeah? Or is it something that you're happy to create as an island? Yeah, we talk, oftentimes we talk about islands and silos and things like that in the way companies are set up. There is a great probability, I think, that some of the things that get deployed in the coming months will be created because of the essence of speed that we'll talk about a bit later on. They'll be created as islands, and that's fine as long as you're conscious about what you're doing. Yeah, as long as you're conscious about the fact that that solution that you're deploying, whatever, it may not be as connected to the rest of the organisation as it needs to be, or that it should be, but you understand, and I don't particularly like this term, but you understand that legacy debt that you are creating along the way, and that you understand how you need to work with that in the future. So this whole business about whether we create the solutions that are point in time. One example recently was a lot of the shops and supermarkets, as they reopen, are looking for ways to manage flow of customers, and quite a lot of them are looking at booking slots, to go to stores, particularly if there are sorts of stores where people browse a lot. Yeah, that probably will be a solution to a problem that exists for a defined length of time, and after that you might not need it unless you turn it into something which is common practice or new practice for the organisation. The other bit about the options and the evaluation and looking at what the choices are is you've got a lot of things that are competing for resources and a lot of things that are competing for time and attention within it. And the overriding priority at the moment is time. It's the time you've got available, but it's also the time that it's going to take to deliver value within that. So, yeah, obviously, when you're looking at the different ways in which you might evaluate which options to choose, which options to pick, you would look at cost. Is it affordable? Is it affordable for me to do it in terms of cost, cash, etc.? Actually, is it affordable in the sense of if I don't do it, what's the implications as well? So. They're obviously going to look at that, but I do think at the moment it's time, and it's time to value. It's quick results. It's about delivering something when it's needed, and it's about making sure that the things you're doing are succeeding and proving to be successful. Yeah. Now, I think it's easy as consultants and easy as people outside the organisation to suggest very rational and logical ways in which you should evaluate options. But ultimately, I think whilst it ought to be some level of agreed objectivity about things, if you've got lots of things to consider, you can't be overly scientific about it. And I think ultimately you might need some logic behind it that leadership within an organisation needs to exhibit some sort of instinct and some sort of gut feel about this. So, you don't want to get stuck where no one can agree over the scoring system or the evaluation scheme or whatever it is. Yeah, you need to move to action. So, this is, the amount of work that people have got to do is, it's a big elephant. It's a big elephant, and we will be looking at things that need to be done operationally, tactically, more strategically. Some of those things will take longer to deliver than others. And I think what's clear is that if you've got a pile of things that you need to get through, you can't just do them sequentially. You can't stack them up as a queue and just work through them. There's a certain element of dividing and conquering and splitting your resources and focusing your effort, so that this whole business, there's a lot of evidence that says if you dilute things and get people to try and multitask too much, they'll be less productive than if they can focus on a few key things. But what happens when the organisation needs to focus on multiple things that start around the same time because of the length of time they get delivered? So we've used this sort of conveyor analogy with clients in the past, where you set up different length conveyors depending upon how quickly you think something's going to get delivered or how quickly you need it for time to value. And that way you can plan and you can orchestrate and you can communicate when different changes are going to land. Now, here it sort of looks like sort of releases, but I mean, in today's environment, we're probably going to be looking at trying to deliver things in weeks rather than months. So setting up conveyors, and you may have, one that sort of sets up to deliver in weeks, another one that's set up to deliver in 2 to 3 months, and another one which is building something that's far more enduring and far more long term, that is looking to deliver in 6 to 9 months. So this conveyor analysis is all about dividing and conquering whilst maintaining focus of individuals and individual teams, setting up squads to run on that. There's another thing here, which is that ultimately you've nailed prioritization, you've nailed your focus, but someone's got to make decisions. Yeah, you're going to need some governance in place, and now is the time to introduce lean governance rather than heavy bureaucratic processes. You want governance that's going to aid decision making and speed things up, rather than I don't know if you're familiar with the other term, the other use of governor, on a mechanical thing is something which is there to regulate the speed and sort of slows things down a bit. We need lean governance that allows people to make quick decisions. And I've made reference there. If you haven't seen the rapid decision-making framework that came from Bain in probably the early 80s now, it's a really useful tool that looks at how you govern the use or the making of decisions. Who is making recommendations, who needs to agree with them, who needs to be sort of provide input to it, who makes the decision, and who performs, acts on the decision being made. So really being very conscious about those decisions, moving to it and acting fast. So the point here is that you need to act fast. You need to be delivering, but we need to reflect and we need to build back in some of those lessons, some of the things that we're experiencing, and make adjustments. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of external change that's going to influence the paths that we take. And having governance processes, decision-making processes that respect that and understand that and are prepared to adjust and be flexible, I think is the key thing to do. The final thing that I wanted to say here is that these might be unprecedented times, there might be uncertain times, but there's probably something to say that the problems organisations face are not going to be insurmountable, and it is about having that clarity of thought and clarity of process and working through things in a way which makes sense to people. And it's a time now for organisations to bring together, to unify the organisations, and really, the number of large organisations that I've worked in where things don't get done because of egos, because of agendas, because of politics, and now's the time to leave all that at the door. Really, there's a higher purpose here that people need to be focusing on, the livelihood of individuals, rebuilding economies, etc. So here, now's the time not to be fussing and fighting. Now's the time to be focused and just driving forwards.
So from a kind of people perspective, from a personal perspective, there are a lot of mirrors there around. Sometimes we can get so caught up with the drama, as it were, either individually or in a team, that we lose sight of that compass bearing of what's important, why are we doing this, what's the crux of the decision. So there's something for me about, there's a mirroring of some of the kind of leadership team or program steering group habits that are the same personally as well. So for example, when Bryan talked about how to make decisions and sometimes using proxies, we can't rely on the lag measures. That's just too late. We've got to figure out what the lead measures are, and they're often a proxy. So thinking about, is it worth me, sleeping more or looking after myself more? You're not going to see the benefit for a while, but you know that it's better to go on a lead measure than a lag measure for that, for example. And also around, when I'm seeing a lot with leadership teams that the people who have not done that work on personally their awareness of what's my state right now. Am I perhaps feeling angry or defensive or scared, and that's going to impact my decision making. So I need to work on myself right now, that I'm not helping the group, or having that ability to look at the group and realize what the group dynamics are, that people tend to become caricatured under stress. So we can think we're using logical frameworks, but what really happens is that you've got the shouty one's getting shoutier, the introverted one's getting more introverted, and it can become a kind of caricature of what a normal team dynamic is like. So having that compass, that kind of what's the point of this again? Let's remind ourselves. And one of the questions that came in earlier was about that kind of, the urgent and important kind of matrix. And I put an answer in around giving yourself the kind of time and the headspace to give things like important but not urgent the weight it deserves. And I think right now we can use process to do the heavy lifting. So whether there's always an agenda item on the board meeting or the project steering meeting around feedback loops, for example, where are we all performing well, where are we not performing well, because it's we're not going to wait for the annual appraisal or the milestone review. That's going to be too late to do that. Or individually thinking, right, this week in this sea of uncertainty, what's worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, what am I going to do differently in the future. So the couple of things I wanted to talk about in terms of taking action was, onto the next slide, there's something for me about the difference between empathy and sympathy. So people, whether it's ourselves going through this journey or the people we're working with, customers, stakeholders, peers, etc., where people emotionally can be kind of all over the place. And the dictionary definition that I've been given of empathy versus sympathy is, empathy would be someone's in the stormy sea and I jump in and join them in the stormy sea. I try and kind of feel what they're feeling. Sympathy would be jumping in and joining, whereas empathy is kind of staying on the boat and remaining safe and throwing the life ring to help them. So it's around, I don't necessarily have to feel what you're feeling to help you. In fact, it might be useful if I don't, because then I'm going to have the safety to give you support. So from a personal level, and also helping other people, there's something about the kind of the power of the word and bridging where people are at now and where they need to be. So for example, if you were to look at this almost like as a process or as a technique, the first step is around acknowledging. Right now, customers are scared. I've got a coachee who is opening a chain. He's got a chain of coffee shops, and he's really conscious that the big drive of his customers is it safe for me to come and get a coffee from you? So the first thing he needs to do is acknowledge that emotional response that they're having. I get your concerns, I hear it, etc. And then bridging it to the message that he wants to give. Same is true for people with investment rounds, talking to their investors. Same is true for parents with their kids. So just to give you a few examples, so it might be, I hear what you're saying. It might be, I get that. I understand your concerns. It might be, I agree it's important that we manage the risk on this. I'm listening. It's just acknowledging the situation that someone is in without jumping in the water with them, as it were. And then the bridge is literally and how often do we use the word but? And the challenge with the word but is, as soon as I say, I hear what you're saying, but I might as well say, I hear what you're saying and I don't care. So it's acknowledging and then bridging towards the, what is the message that we want to give. So it might be, I get your concerns about class sizes, but we need to bring, year 6 back into the schools. Let's figure out how we do that. It might be, I understand your concerns about, social distancing in the factory. What we've put in place is, or it might be around, you know, making sure that people are productive and being clear on what their goals are. I know I get that this is uncertain right now. I get that things might change and that's going to be frustrating. And your goal this week is delivering this bit of the program. So how might that look in? Give you a couple of scenarios. So right now, with my those aren't my kids, by the way. They're far too well groomed. That, you know, it might be around. I get that you know, homeschooling is boring. I get that, and you know, it's going to happen. That's just the way it is. And how can I help you to set up your table? So from a kind of personal perspective, it might be one of those. Or on the next slide, from a professional point of view, as I say, my coaches right now, whether it's how on earth do we get the supply chain working and the flow of production in the factory, whether it's, you know, how are we going to get back to meetings safely, how we're going to open the office safely, how we're going to open the retail space safely. That it's, you know, going from that, I hear your concerns, I understand the complexities, and this is what we're going to do about it. So in terms of that kind of emotional maelstrom, as it were, there's something for me very much about, are we managing ourselves? Are we clear? Are we kind of being empathetic to ourselves but not sympathetic to ourselves, not wallowing in it? And also, are we bringing other people with us? Because with this sea of overwhelm and complexity, and there are so many different conveyor belts that, you know, business-wise we could go down, then getting the people engagement is going to be more crucial than ever.
Thanks, Harriet. So in these sessions, just to revisit them. So in these sessions, we've explored a lot of questions actually about the questions that if organisations look to get answers to, they can start to navigate their way over the next few weeks and months towards whatever the future state looks like. In this session, we looked at, from an organisation perspective and a personal perspective, around that whole bit about prioritisation, about some of the ways in which we can look at options, the options that we're evaluating those options, and then around the planning, the sequencing, the ordering. And I think, you know, most importantly, it's the steps that you can take to, you know, getting stuff done and moving to action. Just, I think, you know, whether it's in the ways in which, you know, I think it was Stephen Covey originally put it, you know, beginning with the end in mind. I was watching the documentary on Ella Fitzgerald with my family the other evening, and, you know, this quote came out. You know, she had a very sort of disturbed and sort of unfortunate upbringing, and, you know, she articulated as, you know, it doesn't matter where you're coming from, it's where you're going that counts. And I think that absolutely keeping the organisational's eyes on, it may not seem like a big prize, but you know, actually, you know, it might be survival is the prize. It might be exploiting or capitalising on an opportunity that's the prize, but keeping the eyes on the prize is the critical thing. So that's it. That's what we wanted to talk about. Would be good to have a good Q&A. Just before we do that, though, how did you do on song titles? Artists, 13 of them. Did you get any of them? How many, Adrian? Sorry, I'm going to put my glasses on because I can't see. 4. Okay, all right, there you go. Anyway, I've even created a Spotify playlist as well if you wanted to look at them. But there were 13 there. They're quite varied there. Good few numbers of the Beatles songs, but nevertheless. So are there any questions? So Barry, do you want us to talk a bit more about how do you keep, you know, outcome prioritization? You know, we should be focusing on the important and the urgent things, and not lose sight of the important but not urgent ones. So did Harriet address that one?
I think it's something, if we've got a bit of time, it's worth spending a bit more time about, because every organization I've been at, you know, you're trying to not firefight, and firefighting is obviously urgent and important. You need to do this immediately, but you need to get some sort of processes or ways of working around that, so you don't have to be fighting, or you're avoiding a lot of firefighting, and you've got sufficient kind of almost a buffer in place, that you have got the mental headspace around looking at what's important but not urgent, because that is really where your it's where you're going to get your biggest value really for the organization.
Yeah.
But it's always a tricky balance, and it's almost like a tightrope. You can't just ever think you've got it sussed. You have to be working on it constantly.
I would say that there are two things, other than the bit about let's be focused on what we're trying to achieve. There are probably two things that work. Sometimes you just got to acknowledge that there's lots of fires that need to be put out, and actually let's focus on putting the fires out and just do that. And then once we've got to the right sort of level, then let's move forward and look at some of the more future orientated stuff. The other one is this point about having dividing up the resources, so that you have people. It's a bit like when you work in IT support versus IT projects. If you have the same group of people who have to deal with service and support, it might be the same in HR, the same in any business where there's sort of an opportunity for problems and incidents to arise, then it's very difficult to have a controlled project being delivered efficiently and effectively if the same resources are constantly getting dragged away to fight the fires and solve problems and issues. And that's where I think the concept of dividing resources, I know all organisations have this luxury, but at least identifying, if you can't split the resources, physically, i.e. one group of people looking at problems and support and the other one looking at projects, then what you can do is you can identify how much capacity, how much of a week's worth of capacity are you going to devote to projects around the support activities. And if that starts to become untenable, then you need to readdress it. So I think that there's the one bit that says just acknowledge it and get on with it and solve the problems, fix the problems before you try, because you need a stable base to do that. The other one is that you set up teams of people to focus on different time horizons, or you look at identifying the capacity that people need.
My Hainesworth as well, to add to that, would be that I'm fascinated on a personal level. I'm really interested. I think people have become quite addicted to short term. I mean, we're anyway quite wired to be short term thinking. That's kept our caveman ancestors alive. So fair enough. And you get a dopamine hit. You get a reward right now of like, put out that fire. It feels good. As leaders, we look good. It can be quite addictive. So I'll be interested to see what kind of bad habits people have got into, kind of worse than normal. And I'm fascinated by habits and habit formation. And there's something for me around how can you make a kind of sacrosanct place in your head. So when Bryan was talking about if you can't divide the resources, if we're talking about you as a leader or you as a program leader or whatever it is, I've got lots of coaches where it's like, right, Friday morning, you do not go near that computer, near that phone. You do not go into the office, even if the office is your bedroom right now. You sit somewhere else physically, mentally, and you look at the long-term stuff. And even if long-term is 2 weeks away in the current environment or 3 months away, it's not like today. Because my challenge to my coachees would be that I get you've got a million fires, but if can you spare half an hour, 15 minutes, an hour to just thinking about what fire can I avoid now that's on the horizon, and ditto in teams as well. It's just having that 10-minute, 15-minute, hours item on the agenda to say we need to look at X. And for sure, cash is being king right now. For sure, there's been plenty of fires, and we've but yeah, that would be my opinion as well.
A comment from Adrian was around Apollo 13. Adrian, what is it about Apollo 13 that you were?
Well, it's a great film, but it obviously describes an unexpected crisis, which I think we've in the middle of. And the key message, I'm not concerned with what it's designed to do. I'm concerned about what it can do. These are about deploying the brains and the skills and the knowledge and use the equipment, the people, particularly, that you've got. Yeah. I think people in this isolated world may have changed. There may be some pearls that need to be identified and then used, and also slightly longer term, the performance management of people is something that is on my mind. Maybe,
amen to that.
I'm just thinking about, some of my clients. So the Apollo 13, great film, but it's on many, many levels. The president wants a message. The team don't give a flying what's it about what message the president's after. They have a different priority, but there are necessarily in that portfolio of priorities. It's getting these three guys back. It's what's happening to the Apollo program. What's the next flight happening? What do we learn from that to avoid that problem going forward? And what's the definition of success? It is success for businesses in June 2021 saying we survived.
Yeah.
Not I missed that three-year bonus scheme is out the window. I'm very sad. But if you're still having the conversation about the company, I think that is success, and it's recalibrating what is success.
Yeah, and we talked a bit about that in the first one as well, about measurements and metrics and realigning how performance is measured and assessed in the current environment. Thanks, Adrian. Thank you.
And I think that also, as I say, the different buckets to look at around, product-wise, what are the gems, marketing-wise, skill-wise. I mean, there's some really, and it sounds so trite to say, kind of like, where's the opportunity? Life gives you lemons, make lemonade. There's a danger of sounding really, really glib, but Brewdog I've been following on LinkedIn has been fascinating that they've brought out Joke Beer, for Dominic Cummings. They've got a real, marketing campaign around that. They've been doing hand sanitizer, so in terms of product and message, and as you say around skills, who are the people who can be resilient to work collaborative, and around systems. Now different industries for sure have got very different profiles on this. If you're talking to a aviation firm right now versus, or a travel agent, firm versus a video conferencing firm, of course, for sure, it's different flavors, but that kind of how can I use this? I think there's huge opportunities as well.
Has anyone got any other questions or comments? Sorry, I'll keep on hitting the.
Just coming in on the urgent and not important again. I think I agree a lot with what Harriet's just said, that people kind of make things into urgent and important in order to try and get the focus on it. And part of it is being able to effectively split things out and be really, really clear on whether something is urgent and important, or really whether someone's just making a big deal. And then additionally, the solution to an urgent and important can actually be something that's a little bit longer term if it needs to be. It's about not cutting your corners too sharply. So if we're in interesting times, there's going to be a lot of patching and a lot of bodging stuff together, but you've got to do that within the context of the overall cost of that bodge. And actually sometimes it's worth spending a little bit more time and really doing things properly so that it doesn't bite you later. And I think that's one of the real challenges of being an IT leader, is being able to go through that and knowing when to say, yeah, just go ahead and put the bodge in, and actually saying, no, this time this is going too far. This needs to be done properly, and all we can do is something very, very interim to hold it together, but we have to resolve this.
Yeah, and that's that bit about connected versus islands, and whether it's a point in time or whether it's something that needs to endure, and whether you need to go back and revisit it. And repair some of that and get rid of some of that debt that you've created.
I hope at least that something will stick as the conversations. I've seen a lot of businesses suddenly wake up, it's like, oh, is that what IT does? Oh, is that what buildings does? Or is that what risk management does? It's like they finally get it, and they've never got it. So those forums for having those conversations hopefully will endure, and for having those feedback. I mean, I've got a leadership team at the moment where oh my God, it sounds desperately cheesy, but they've got Feedback Friday, whatever works for you. The point being that they're trying to have very, very frequent conversations around what's working and what isn't, and that hopefully is a system that's going to stick. That IT and risk and marketing are going to continue to talk to each other when they didn't traditionally.
Bryan?
Yes.
Another part of that focusing on the recovery and what to prioritize is just going back to the comment just there, was about the exemptions and waivers that companies have done to their policies or guidelines to get business continuing through the last 10 weeks, they have to be reprioritized to refix or reset an original policy, because things will be different as well, but maybe we need to reinstall some of the policies for information security purposes that we've waived.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same thing will apply to, has applied to product launches as well, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, people have been allowed to bring products to market quite rapidly in different instances. But that's a good point, Peter. Yes, they will need to. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? No. So we would, you know, really like to get any feedback. We can had some good feedback afterwards, and some good also a little bit of coaching feedback, which was good as well. So you know, we changed the format of this one slightly. We will send out a link to the content. I'll send out a link to the recording as well. And as last time, so you know, in true BBC style, if you've been affected by any themes or topics that we discussed today, then all our contact details are here. Yeah, Harriet will also send you, if you haven't already got it, access to her resource rucksack as well, a good little library compendium that you're building up week on week, Harriet, are you? Of hints and tips and things that you can do from an individual perspective. Was there any final questions? We all right? Are we good? Good, right. Enjoy the sunshine, and thank you very much for joining us today. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Thanks, bye now.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, bye.